This new series is called The Real, and we're digging into raw emotions that each and every one of us has had, could have, or might have currently. And today's emotion is loneliness. Loneliness. We each go through it. Some of us don't look lonely because we're surrounded by people, but we are lonely. Others of us have lost everything and we're lonely. Others of us have overcome the emotion of loneliness and need to know how to operate in it. But we haven't figured it out yet. And others of us have figured it out and we operate in it and it's totally fine. So, how can I talk to a body of believers who has walked the life and has been introduced to loneliness time and time again? Well, through the Word of God. That's the simple answer. So, I want to dig into the Word of God before I get to the meat and potatoes. I'm going to get to the meat and potatoes. So, Ruth chapter 1, there's no one else who knows loneliness better than the ladies in Ruth. And so, ladies, I'm not just talking to you. Gentlemen, I think we can learn something from a lady in this scripture, so don't shut your ears off. Open them up. I've learned something, and I'm excited to share what I've learned. So, Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. We're just going to start right off in the beginning. We're going to jump around a little bit, but that's all right. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1 says this: In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and his 2 sons with him. The man's name was, and I'm going to mess this up and I'm okay with it, Eli Melech. Yeah, see, my mouth doesn't work. So we'll just continue. Eli and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites, something. See, Old Testament, your pronunciation could be just as wrong as mine. So it's ancient Hebrew. So we're good. From Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, and when they reached Moab, they settled there. Then Amalek died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, my bad, and the other woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons and her husband. I read this to allow us to know the background behind someone else's loneliness. We can find false strength when we look to our spouses or our sons or daughters to create that void, to complete that void of loneliness. We don't always know the stories behind someone's loneliness. Recommendation number 1: don't assume someone's loneliness is caused by something you've gone through. Don't assume someone's loneliness isn't powerful. My heart cries out and aches for the lonely. I know what it's like to be a little lonely through situations in my life. I might not know what it's like to be your lonely, but I know what it's like. I've gone through losing a best friend. But I was lonely for a second, and I regained my strength. I've gone through breakups in the past. I've gone through that. I've been lonely because I didn't have a significant other. In fact, I've made someone lonely. We'll talk about that later. I've made someone lonely at one time. It was only for a few minutes. Then God smacked me across with the rod of wisdom. But we all can cause loneliness, and we can all have loneliness. But if we let it overcome us, we're going to isolate ourselves from everyone that cares about us. And we're going to isolate ourselves from the one who really, really cares about us. Loneliness can overcome us, but if we allow it to overcome us, it will completely destroy us. So many times, I read Ruth and I never got this. Ruth's not the lonely one here. Ruth's not the lonely one. Who does it say is lonely? Sorry? Naomi. Naomi's lonely. She just lost her sons and her husband. She has no one in her eyes. No one. Check this out. Ruth 1, 6 through 9. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab and return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-laws, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they broke down and wept. She's so lonely, she wants to be even more alone. You see that? She's so lonely, she walks on her way back to Judah, not knowing the plan that God has in store for her, and she sends them away. No, get away from me. I want to be alone. How many times in our life have we pushed people away in our most lonely times? How many times in our walk, in our days, do we just feel lonely? Even though I'm married, sometimes I feel lonely, especially every 6 weeks, because I have to take care of a boy by myself, or because I'm just not seeking the right place. So many times I can be reading the Word and still feel lonely. I can be praying and still feel lonely. Even though the knowledge tells me, God, you're right there. Ruth is not lonely. She has her sister-in-law and her mother-in-law. And she loves them dearly. But Naomi, no, it feels too good when I'm with you. Get away from me. I shouldn't be feeling this. I've lost my sons and my husband. I shouldn't be feeling hopeful. How do I know? How do I know? We'll get there. See, she stops in the middle of the road to send 2 daughter-in-laws away. And they have a long, drawn-out conversation. Get away from me. Go be with your dads and your moms. Go live with them. Go. You don't need me. Nothing good is going to happen when you come with me. Go. I've lost everything. You've only lost a husband. I lost my sons. How many times do we feel like people just don't get it? You think Naomi's like, Ruth, you don't get it. Oprah? Or Orpah? Not Oprah. She different. Or you don't get it. You just lost a husband. You can remarry. I will never regain my sons. No, you're right. But I'm not going to leave you hanging. See, I love my mom. My mom makes her daughters-in-laws, at least my wife, feel like a daughter. It's weird. She doesn't question her. She defends her every time. That tells you that my mom is my go-to, which is good because my mom defends Lola more than she defends me. Okay? That's a good mother-in-law. That's a good mom. One to confront her son and be like, you're not doing this right. And I'm sitting there going, what are you talking about? You're supposed to be my mom. Right? And here, Naomi is going, daughter-in-law, get away from me. When she could be, daughter-in-laws, come close. I need you. Be my crutch. How many of us will find the crutch in the people we want to send away, but we won't admit that we want them as a crutch? You want to defeat loneliness? Stop sending everybody away. Yeah. I hear all the time. But we need this time alone. Then, okay, when you go to bed, recognize that time. Recognize that time as your time with God. When you wake up, recognize that time. Recognize it as your alone time. but then find somebody. Don't just sit there in your loneliness and weep. Don't just sit there in your loneliness and dwell. Don't just sit there. See, Naomi wants to. We've all met those people that like the feeling of feeling terrible rather than feeling good. They love it. They'd rather sit in it. Naomi is one of those people. How do I know? Read this. We're jumping up to verse 19. Ruth 1:19 through 22 says this. So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, they entered the entire town. They entered the town, and the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi? The women said. Familiar faces remember the Naomi that they lost. They remember the Naomi they lost. Friends, people that hung out with her. They remember her. Anybody like being remembered? Anyone? You go to a town and you're like, oh yeah, I remember you. You're so-and-so, and it's great. When someone remembers your name, and these people didn't just recognize her, they remembered her name. Right? Check this out. She is such a Debbie Downer. Verse 20. Don't call me Naomi, she responded. Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. How many of you would rather be retitled in your life because of your emotions? Anyone want to be Mara, bitter? You want to claim that identity? Because Naomi just claimed it. You know what Naomi means? Sweetness. Oh, I'm not sweet anymore. I lost my 2 sons and my boy, so now I'm bitter. So many times in life, loneliness will make us bitter rather than sweet. But God has called us to be sweet, not bitter. He's put on you a title of sweetness, not bitterness. But we isolate ourselves because bitterness can seep in and conquer us, and it feels so good. We don't want to feel sweet without our significant other. We don't want to feel cherished without our significant. We don't want to feel this without our best friend. We don't want to feel that. We don't want to have fun anymore without our best friend, right? And God says, okay, well then I'll make you a bore person. Like you're bored all the time. And you're isolated. You have no friends. My favorite thing that kids say when I was a youth pastor is, well, I just don't have any friends. Really? Because I see you hanging out with everybody before service and after service. Knock it off. Take them in. Be the identity that God has called you to be. See, Naomi put Mara on herself. God put Naomi on Naomi. You are supposed to be sweetness. Look at these trials you're going through. I'm allowing you to go through the loss of your husbands and the loss of your sons because I'm creating a more sweet person. Lola made her first ever dairy-free frosting the other day, and she gave me a taste, and I'm like, woo, that's sweet. Too sweet for my liking. But that is what God is doing with us. He's taking the normal frosting that's just the right amount of sweetness and putting too much in because you have the ability to share your sweetness with everybody. But loneliness comes in to try to conquer that. It wants to take your sweetness out and become bitterness. See, you become bitter through isolation. See, it's not loneliness that creates bitterness. It's loneliness that leads the way to isolation that creates bitterness. Anybody ever realize that? I picture it this way. The movies say a lot. I forget what movie this is in. Grumpy Old Men. Okay, anybody ever see Grumpy Old Men? Are they bitter old men? What made them bitter? Was it the loss of their spouse, or was it the isolation they became in? It was the isolation. They lost their spouse, they isolated themselves, and they became bitter. They were once good friends, now they're bad friends, now they're good friends again. Because they started talking to each other. It wasn't the nicest things, but someone united them. Right? So many times in our life, we isolate ourselves from everything else that's happening around us because maybe it's this. Maybe we're lonely because too much change is happening. Ouch. There's too much change. I don't want that. I want to isolate myself. Well, why doesn't anyone ever come over anymore? Why don't people see me anymore? Why don't I ever get a visit from that person that always visited me? And the one resounding thing is, you left what was changing. You left what was changing. So all of a sudden, you lost your family. You lost your friends. You lost everything because you wouldn't go to what's changing. I don't remember it, therefore I'm not going to it. That's not how I live, so I'm not going there. See, Naomi wants that. She doesn't want people to recognize her for who she was. She wants them to recognize her for who she's trying to become. I totally went off my notes, so I'm trying to find myself again. I apologize. Your situation does not have to overcome who you are. Loneliness doesn't have to overcome who God's created you to be. He hasn't created you to be lonely to relate to the lonely. He's given you lonely situations so you can overcome and relate to the lonely to help them overcome. He's given you loneliness so that you would recognize that maybe your loneliness is different than someone else's loneliness. It's to help you recognize maybe not what they're going through, but that your emotions are the same, your situations are different. I know this feeling you're going through. I don't know the situation that you've gone through completely, but I know the feeling you're in. And if you let it get into you, it's going to conquer you. You know the one thing that got me from being lonely because my best friend passed away is his joy for life. And it's funny that his joy for life and his joy for adventure would be the one thing that would take him. And that's one of the best things because his joy for life and his fun for his look for adventure is what took his life, but he died doing something he loved. How many of us can say, I'm going to die doing something I enjoy doing? How many of us enjoy teaching the gospel and preaching the gospel and sharing the gospel and bringing people to Christ? Are we willing to admit that we're not? Because by not raising your hand, you're willing to admit that's not something I enjoy doing. I hope, it's the most morbid death ever, but I always told the Lord, I said, before I was married, I said, Lord, take me as a martyr. You know what martyr means? Somebody, come on. What's martyr mean? Mark. To die for something you believe in, right? Die for one's beliefs. So if you're a martyr, you're dying because of your beliefs. If you die sharing the gospel, raising up people from death to life, I'll take that. Satan tried to take me, but God conquered it. I went to live in heaven. There's a psalm that says, I delight in the death of my saints. I mean, I want to go out doing something I love. If you don't know me, I like to tell people about Jesus. I like to be creative. I like to relate to people in ways they never thought I could relate to them. I was talking to this guy. He's an atheist. It's funny. I was talking to him about this message, and I said one of the lines that I wrote in the message, and he goes, oh, man, that's really good. What are you doing? Writing a book? I said, no, I'm writing a message for a Sunday morning. He goes, no way, man. You can't be talking about that. I'm talking about loneliness. Everybody relates to it, but God wants to use it. And you might not know the situation that created the loneliness, but you know the loneliness so you can research the situation. And then guess what? Jesus creeps in. And he shares his beautiful face, his amazing face, and he shares the love of who he is in the midst of their emotion. But we get too scared. We go, no, Lord, I don't want to fall in love with what you've called me to do. Ouch. I don't want to be lonely sharing the gospel. But guess what? Some of the most lonely people are the people that share the gospel. Why? Because we're all called to it. We should have a mass army of gospel sharers. But only one or two of us go. I'm not saying I'm the only one. I do like sharing the gospel. I know Cricket shares the gospel. She has story after story after story. I know Connie shares the gospel. I could probably call out everybody who shares the gospel. Some people I don't know well enough. But we're all called to share the gospel, and we shouldn't feel lonely, but it seems to be that we don't call on each other to share the gospel together. And we isolate ourselves to share the gospel. Loneliness causes isolation. Isolation causes a possible issue with you sharing the gospel. This isn't in my notes. This is free. When you isolate yourself in sharing the gospel, the enemy can attack and find you weak. It's not because you're alone in sharing the gospel. It's not because the Holy Spirit isn't with you. It's because you're alone. And where two or more are gathered, not only worshiping his name, but sharing his gospel, you become an army, intertwined, locked in, ready with unity, saying, we come in peace to see the lost come to Jesus. But what if loneliness has conquered you? How do you defeat it? How do you overcome something that's already overcome you? I'd ask Robin Williams, but I didn't get the chance. How many people have ever overcome loneliness after it's conquered them? It's important to recognize this because loneliness creates isolation, which creates death in someone's life, spiritually and physically. We have to reach the lonely while they're lonely before they're overcome. We have to. My brother lives in Pierre, South Dakota. Pierre, South Dakota is not known as isn't known for being the capital of South Dakota. It's more known for being the highest per capita suicide rate in the United States for teens. Maybe I should go up there and preach this message. But the Lord says, I want to tell, this week he's sitting there saying, I want to tell my people who know loneliness how important it is to conquer loneliness in your own life and in those around you. You're not going to conquer it for them. It's like this morning, you're marching around your own heart's walls, not someone else's heart's walls. You're marching around your heart's walls to conquer the heart of your life. And God's saying, I want you to conquer the loneliness in your life so that you can go out and help someone walk around their own wall to conquer the loneliness and the heartbreak in their life so that they can come into the understanding of Jesus Christ. That's called discipling. I don't know if you are getting this, if this is talking to you like it's talked to me over the past week. But I believe we are called to reach the lonely. Last week we preached on fear. And again, I feel like we are called to reach those who fear. I think it's a great thing that we're stepping out on Halloween in one of the darkest nights, declaring, Lord, I am not scared of a single night. I'm not scared of the enemy because I know you are my protector. I'm going to step out on one of the darkest nights in which some of us used to lock our door and hide. But now I'm unlocking my door, I'm stepping out, I'm going to church, and I'm conquering a city on Halloween because you've put us together. See, going through the emotions, we know fear, we know loneliness, we know other emotions like nervousness. We know a lot of emotions, but do we know how to use them? Here's the funny thing. Naomi is the one we should be talking about. And Ruth steps in and stays. Do you know what Ruth means? Anybody? This is the definition I got. Check this out. I agree with that. But check this out. Ruth means feeling of pity, distress, or grief. That's Google. We have misdefined Ruth because the name Ruth does not identify with Ruth. She was a friend. She was not distressed. She created relief. She was not with a lack of relief. Right? Yeah, she lost her husband. Yeah, she stayed with mother-in-law. That's what makes her a friend. But check this out. Ruth 2, verse 5 through 7. Then Boaz asked his foreman, who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to? And the foreman replied, she is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes rest in the shelter. Boaz notices someone. Maybe it's because she's a good-looking woman, right? Or maybe it's because she's unrecognizable. But he recognizes her. Loneliness can be conquered by recognizing. How many times have we heard this story? I was going to commit suicide, but then someone called me. But then someone showed up at my door. But then someone noticed me in the mass crowd. But then. Loneliness can be conquered by recognizing. The more people you recognize, the more likely you are to conquer loneliness in someone's life. Oh, let's dig into a big controversial fact. The more extroverted you are, the more likely you're going to introduce yourself to somebody. The more likely, if you're introducing yourself to somebody, the more likely they are to feel recognized. And the more likely you are to open a door to defeat loneliness in their life. Extroverted. I don't understand why, when I feel introverted, I have to feel introverted. I was not created to be introverted. God created me for His purpose, and His purpose is extroverted. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has a call, everybody has a gifting, everybody has a personality, and those personalities are designed specific for something. But if I allow loneliness to conquer me, I become more introverted. Introverted seeks what? Isolation. Extroverted seeks what? Friendships. Are we willing to put our introverted selves on the shelf to become extroverted, to feed people, to love people, to change their identity, to change our identity? Are we willing to put our introverted self away, even if it means we're recharging, and live a life of tiredness because of His call on our life? And some of us would say no. That's okay. I don't understand it. Maybe someday the Lord will enlighten me. But God has called us all to be extroverted in ministry. He has not called us to put ourselves on a shelf and be isolated. But He's called us to be in someone's life, in others' lives. When people leave us, we go find new people. If they aren't our people anymore, let's find new people that are our people. Let's not look at how we've lost people, but look how we can gain people in our lives. Ruth went to a man she didn't know was related to Naomi. She didn't know that field was Naomi's cousin or whatever. She didn't know that. She didn't know that that belonged to Naomi's cousin. But Boaz is a close relative. Maybe it's her brother. I don't know. It just says close relative. Right? And so she shows up on Boaz's land and he notices her. And he finds out who she is. Guess what? Check this out. Ruth 2, 8 through 12. Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter." Ooh, she already has daughter. She's not some stranger anymore. "Listen, my daughter. Listen." That right there should have told Ruth, guess what? I got you. Right? "Listen, my daughter. Stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Right behind the young woman working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting, and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yeah, I know," Boaz replied. Had to say yeah because, yes is not me. But yeah, I know, Boaz replied. "But I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come, take refuge, reward you fully from what you have done." Naomi wanted to isolate herself, but had the ability to share a story with some relatives. And that made full circle over to Boaz. Ruth said, "I want to go out and collect for you, Naomi. I want to feed you." And she goes out, and by going out, she doesn't become isolated just with Naomi anymore. And she creates relationship. And people see her. They recognize her. They love her. They call her daughter. What's funny is soon he's going to call her wife. See, it creates, when we step out of our comfort zones of wanting to feel lonely, we are going to create things in our life that will bring us out of loneliness and into His presence, if we allow it. See, God, we say we are not alone. Tell someone who's lonely that they're not alone and that they have God. Show me how much work that does. Because most of the time when I'm lonely and someone says, Ben, don't worry, you're not alone, I go, really? I do not want to hear that God is with me right now. How many times in your life when you're lonely do you want to hear God is with you? Didn't Gideon hear, do not be afraid? Is that what Gideon wanted to hear? No, Gideon wanted to hear what God said next. But if you are afraid, take Purah and go down to the enemy's camp. No, he wanted to hear that because he wanted to hear the encouragement. Because the enemy knew more about his victory than he knew about his victory. And here we are. Naomi, sad. Call me Mara. Don't call me bitter, not sweet. Because that is what God has allowed me to be. Really? You need friends in your life to call you sweet. You need friends in your life to encourage you, strengthen you, walk along with you. Not be alone and walk out this battle alone. You need someone that's going to come around you. I don't care if they're Christian or not Christian. You know the truth, right? Right? So if they're walking you through and they're not a Christian, God sent them to walk you through. He sent an enemy's tool to walk you through life so that you can encourage that enemy's tool to become a Christ follower and become God's tool. Loneliness can defeat us. And if we walk alone, we'll never find the opportunity of leading someone else to Jesus that doesn't know Jesus. If we walk alone, we'll never find an opportunity to encourage someone who needs encouragement in our family. We'll never find someone within the four walls if we just sit at home and do nothing or stay at home and mow the yard. We're never going to find those opportunities. See, God is calling us out of our own comfort zones to go after the lost, the lonely, the brokenhearted, and we all got it. We all get loneliness. We don't get the situation, but we get the loneliness. Is this hitting on open ears today, or is this just like, pfft? I hope this is what we need to hear. I pray, Lord, don't let this be something that's not supposed to be heard, but this is something supposed to be heard. Here's the thing. Ruth, although might be lonely because she lost her husband, has not lost her loyalness. Ruth, lonely with loyalness. She embraces Naomi, says, "Nuh-uh, you're not doing this alone." See, Naomi finds her salvation. This is a salvation story. This is a prophetic story. Naomi finds her salvation in Ruth. You know where Ruth finds her salvation? I'll have the band come on up. Ruth finds her salvation through Boaz. It's a salvation story. Your loneliness can be saved through a friend. Anyone ever heard be Jesus for somebody? Or is that just me? Be somebody's Jesus. Be somebody's Jesus. They're not going to look at you when they come to Christ and go, "Wow, Jesus, I'm so glad." No, they're going to look up to heaven and go, "Jesus has saved me, and it was through this tool, Ben. It's through this tool. Put your name in." God has called us to something to help people become free from loneliness, free from fear, free from emotion. That doesn't mean you're not going to have emotion. That just means you're going to know how to operate through it. How many times in our life do we hear that depression has taken someone's life? Depression has caused death somehow. The depressed have gone and shot up a bunch of people. These emotions have overcome our minds, and we're so lost that we end up in mental hospitals to get it figured out rather than at the altar to get it figured out. I don't know about you, but the only person that can clear a mind is God. I'm sorry. A med can help for a second, but it will be overcome if you're not looking in the right place. God is calling us to help people emotionally heal, not just emotionally, supernaturally emotionally heal. Don't do this alone. Don't be Naomi. Don't push people away and declare an identity over yourself of bitterness. Declare sweetness. Look for people who are going to go, "You're so sweet," that they're going to encourage you, but they're going to tell you the truth. Maybe you are bitter today. You know what? You are so bitter today, but I know that's not your heart. I know you're so angry today, but I know that's not your heart. I know you're so mad at everybody all the time. That's not your heart. God hasn't created you to do that. Hey, I want you to hear above everything else I've said today. God despises loneliness because loneliness directs you away from His presence. Loneliness separates you from his presence. Not him, his presence. We get so lonely, we get so fearful. And fear is birthed out of the unknown. Fear is birthed out of the unknown. And the unknown in Naomi's life is life without her sons and her husband. And so she's so fearful that loneliness is birthed because of a situation. She doesn't know what's going on. She's fearful. All of a sudden her sons die. Maybe they were sick. Maybe something was happening. I can't imagine life without them. I can't do this. I can't do that. No, God, no, no, no. And loneliness conquers. And she only knows one direction to go because she's only experienced one direction to go, and that's isolation. I have no one to serve anymore. I guess I'm just here by myself. That was the culture then. Maybe that's your reality. But God's calling you, there are people to serve. There's the lost, the lonely, the broken, the hurt. They're the hungry, the naked. There's so many people in our community that are hungry. I'm not talking about spiritually. Yes, they're there spiritually. Every single one of us are spiritually hungry. We should be. Don't be content with your hunger for God. Be content with your hunger for God, but don't ever be satisfied. Don't ever be Lord wants to make you hungry. Eat so you can distribute your weight amongst our community. You need to hear that. We have too many obese Christians because we haven't distributed our weight amongst the community, amongst Lakin. We are religiously big, but we are spiritually small, Lakin people. We need to conquer the religious spirit in our own hearts. Religious spirit, I was talking to a friend, creates traditional hearts. Traditional hearts hate change. I'm not a religious spirit. I don't want to be a religious spirit. I want to be spiritually awakened every single day. And when spiritual awakeness happens every single day, newness conquers my life. I hate change as much as the rest. But guess what? Change is bound to happen. Embrace it. Embrace it. If you embrace change, loneliness can be conquered. I promise you. I promise you. The Lord tells that. The Lord was surrounded by 12 people, and sometimes even 5,000. 5,000. And guess what? He found loneliness with the 5,000. He sent them away to be with his 12. Sent them all away. Sometimes you just need your close personal friends to walk through life with you.